Hello everyone and welcome back to the GeekWave. This is the low budget show. It's the show so low it has no budget. It is the Halloween season, and yes, I have a Halloween episode that should be coming up after the fandom stuff. But before we even do the fandom stuff, I have another one in the bunker. Bunker? In the tank? Yeah, whatever. That's this episode. For the past year, I've been doing GeekWave. I've talked about the sitcoms of the 2010s. Of the 2000s. Well, in this episode, we are going back to pre-Y2K, when was bell-bottom jeans? That was probably before Y2K. Pre-Y2K, we're doing pre-Y2K stuff, and we're looking at the best sitcoms of the 90s, which is going to be a very controversial list. I have no doubt about it. And we will get into that very quickly. I'm super pumped to get into this one because some of my favorite shows are from this era. As you can see by the thumbnail, if you're watching this on YouTube, definitely going to be talking about a certain show by a certain guy whose name might be in the movie. And no, I'm not talking about Frasier Crane, but we will be talking about Frasier Crane. Before we get into any of that, we do have a couple pieces of news to talk about. Not a lot, because I know there's going to be an onslaught coming, probably from New York Comic Con, and probably from DC Fandom that we'll get to next week. But before any of that, we do have a few pieces here. There has been a lot of speculation on upcoming Disney Plus Marvel properties, and it's just like, hey, is it going to be Zayling getting her own thing? Is it going to be Monica Rambeau getting her own thing? I'm not going to bring those up because they're just speculation at this point. But one I do want to talk about and touch on is the is it the Variety? Yeah, it's Variety, not Vanity Fair. Variety kind of like put out an article saying, hey, Catherine Hahn will be leading an Agatha Harkness series. I think that makes sense. I mean, you're going to want to do your follow-up to WandaVision. Whatever that is, Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, whatever that's going to be, you're going to want to do your follow-up. So I can completely see why this character, who people were speculating to be one thing, turned out she was Agatha. That's going to become something different. That makes sense to me. Agatha has always been kind of a neutral character sometimes, so play with that, have fun, bring in some more magical people. I think that's a great idea. This could be where you'd be like, yeah, there's Mephisto, just so you all shut up about it. Mephisto's in here. He's doing his Mephisto thing. That's great. If this is true, I'd love to see it. Catherine Hahn is probably one of the most amazing talents out there right now. She has been great in everything she's done. She is so interesting and creative. I just love seeing what that woman does, and I think she could pull it off. She could definitely hold her own as the lead. That character is kind of, I don't want to say Sabrina-ish, but it's kind of more like maybe one of like the aunts in Sabrina, where it's like, hey, maybe she's doing some destructive things behind the scenes to keep this person safe. I could see that being the case. I think that'd be really cool. People have been saying they should call it Agatha All Along. That's a great title. We should use it. But Marvel is not known for their great titles. And speaking of great titles, Isaac Asimov's big old, whatever the hell it is, Foundation. Is that the name of the book? I've never read the book. I'm not going to read it. Foundation has premiered on Apple TV. At this point, I think we're four episodes in. I'll do a review of that when it's all done, but I'm not going to say my thoughts right now because it's a really interesting show, to say the least. But it got renewed. So, obviously, somewhere in the pantheon of whatever the hell going on in the world, somebody out there really liked Foundation, the show, and they renewed it. Yep. I'll do my review on it, but as it stands, I think the show is kind of a mess. It's all over the place. The storylines aren't compelling. I do believe there was some character swaps where a certain person was changed, and I'm not saying that's going to hurt it, but it's going to negatively impact the people that this is going to be for, and the time jumps and everything just don't work. I'm sorry, they just don't. And this show is okay, but a second season I think could be more streamlined and make something a little more interesting. So we'll talk about it more later. As it stands, yeah, it's okay. But our final piece of news here, like I said, it's a short news week. Timothée Chalamet, who will be appearing in Dune in the French Dispatch this month, well, he just went to his Twitter. That's where I saw it, at least. Maybe it was on like a news outlet or something, his Instagram maybe. He went to his Twitter, and all he did was post a picture of himself in a beautiful hat, a nice-looking jacket, with the caption, Wonka. That's right. We knew Timothée Chalamet was going to be playing Wonka. We have our first official look as him as the titular character. And by golly, is the internet right when we say it looks like Gonzo from A Muppet Christmas Carol? It's the same colors of everything, and it looks great. I love it. I'm a huge Willy Wonka guy. I've always liked that character. I like the book. I like the world. It's just weird and off-putting, and the guy's a sociopath that's literally endangering the lives of millions for no reason other than he's just a crazy dude. And Timothy, I think, compared to a lot of other young actors, could definitely do something creative with that. And, something that really impresses me about Chalamet, and I think this is really evocative of his character, is that he's willing to do these franchise pieces, but not the ones people are expecting of him. He's not doing a Star Wars, a Star Trek, a Marvel, a DC, any of that kind of stuff. He's like, yeah, Dune. People know Dune. That's a good popular book. Willy Wonka, people like him. I can turn that into something that isn't going to have the world bash on me or tell me otherwise for it. I think that's a good move. That's really cool. It's really creative. I like Chalamet a lot, so his Wonka would be very impressive. We will be talking more about Willy Wonka on this channel. I have no doubt about that. Probably come closer to the release of this movie. We'll do movie tales talking about both Willy Wonka films. And I could probably... Interesting. I had a really interesting idea. Yes, okay. I have an idea for GeekWave. I'm going to put it in the notes. Turning the Willy Wonka character into different franchises or genres. So... that's great. We're going to take a quick break because that's all the news we have. When we come back, let's take a trip back to when boomboxes were big, pogs were back in pog form, and, just great times because, baby, the blues were calling. Tossed salads and scrambled eggs. Oh, my. Okay, so the 90s, situational comedies. Is it the pinnacle of the situational comedy? Is that what the 90s have brought us? Some could argue that. I mean, my generation, and I'm going to say like millennial to post-millennial is my generation, however you want to interpret that. I was born in the 90s. There are certain people, I'd say my age and older, are willing to go back to the 90s and watch stuff, maybe younger than me. There's only certain ones, and they're more like, the Good Place, the Parks and Rec, the Communities, The Office, all that stuff. Those are good too. But the 90s was an interesting era for situational comedies. They just had this almost like free range to talk about whatever they wanted with little criticism, or there was criticism and nobody really noticed. I'm sure some of these, maybe there was controversy to them for certain episodes and stuff, but there was still this like era of just people comfortable with going a little weird to it. Some of the jokes, of course, are outdated and don't work. They didn't work then and now, but the 90s just had this certain energy to it. It was like, the 80s was this kind of like manic, just the sharp wit to it. The 90s, I think, is just a little more sarcastic, and maybe that's just something people like. I know I'm okay with it. Some of my favorite shows are from the 90s. Two in particular on this list I put in my top 3 favorite shows of all time. And I'm not like an asshole when it comes to my favorite television. I think it's pretty standard. The stuff I like it's the best. It's honestly the best. But there is one show from the 90s, and I have like mixed rules when I talk about this stuff. It's like, does it, air in the 90s? I think the majority of the show has to be in the 90s to consider it a 90s show. The first one on my list I have to bring up because much like The Office before it, this is a show that has taken on a cultural significance of its own, and it's not a show I particularly enjoy, and that, of course, is the hit sitcom where no one told you life was going to be this way. Of course, it's Friends. Now, I had to put Friends on here. I can't make this list and not talk about Friends, mainly because it has culminated into something bigger than any sitcom ever. It is probably one of the most rewatched shows of all time. It is probably one of the most quoted shows of all time, the most iconic series of all time. It has become this incredibly amazing thing that has stood true for generation after generation of people who can go back and watch it and just accept it. And that is almost rare to see in a show like this, because honestly, and I mean this as somebody who has seen every episode of Friends more than once, the show is not that funny or interesting. it is pretty standard stuff. You got your obvious love interest, you got your obvious, sarcastic friend, nerdy friend, crazy friend, quirky friend, the hot one, the dumb one. None of them are that interesting as people, and I know why people like it. It's that idyllic fantasy that every young person has where you can just move to a popular city, live with your best friends, and your life is just going to be crazy and fun. You're just going to go on wacky adventures and just hang out all the time at a coffee shop, but it's not realistic. I know there's arguments about can they afford the apartment they live in. They couldn't, but who cares? That doesn't matter. And the characters themselves, they are just so obvious and just so easy, and I know people love this show. And I will never bash anyone for thinking Friends is their favorite sitcom ever, just because it hits every single sitcom trope. It does everything perfectly. The love interest, the storylines, when it needs to be dramatic. It literally does every trope of like extending itself for too long, doing the failed romance pairings, doing, like the baby and the marriage and just all the stuff that could hinder the show. It does. And it's amazing that it actually works that well after that long. 10 seasons of these guys is a lot. It is a lot. It's insanely weird. But I will never criticize someone for liking Friends. All I'll say is like, oh, it's just a bunch of white people in a building doing the idyllic fantasy that they never commit to. And I think that sucks. Like, it's just not my cup of tea. And I like this kind of stuff. Something I've said, and I stand by this statement, and I might have got some criticism for it before. New Girl is just a good version of Friends, mainly because you see the struggle in them. Like they can't afford to pay certain things. Nothing just falls into their lap. They are caricatures that actually feel like caricatures, where the Friends characters were supposed to believe that, they're these certain types of people. But on New Girl, you just see them. You're like, oh yeah, these aren't real people. But people think they would exist like that. They're not. And it's just I put it like this. Jess is just like if you mixed Monica and Phoebe together, and that somehow feels more authentic than just like Monica and Phoebe, And Schmidt's just like Joey played to the extreme, and it works. And it's just a little more interesting than what Friends provided. But how could I not talk about Friends in any capacity on this? It is a seminal show, and I get it. I get it. It's not for me. I'm also one of those guys that just can't be a part of the big, group interest. When people were talking about Friends, I was the guy who was like, but baby, I hear the blues of Callin, and they have tossed salads and scrambled eggs. Because Frasier is, I think, quintessentially the 90s. I love Frasier. And when we get to the 80s sitcoms, I will talk more about, Cheers and all that. But Cheers was a seminal show in my life. I watched it at this perfect time where it just hit me in every chord. And I remember distinctively, I think it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, I watched the episode with introduced Frasier Crane. I saw him and I went, okay, I get it. I get why Kelsey Grammer did this character for over 20 years. I get why this was the one you spun off. I get why people liked this. It was the more intellectual of the shows of the time, and not even like smart. It was just a little bit more like nuanced. It was that manic kind of energy where you have these two intellectual guys, Frasier and Niles, playing off the world around them. And you have those guys who are socially distant from the world. You can kind of like do some more weird stuff. Again, it's these caricatures of real people, but it just made for some interesting type of storytelling and some fun stuff. I liked having the setting in Seattle. I haven't seen every sitcom ever. And I just remember Frasier was the Seattle one. It was the one that was like on the other side of the United States. A lot of them, stuck to New York. Like the big two stuck to New York. But Frasier is like, it's Seattle. He's like, a radio DJ guy who's giving you therapy advice. He's a psychiatrist on the radio. And I think that's a really cool concept to play with. And all of the side characters in Frasier too, they're all very enjoyable. Like I just enjoy seeing them a lot more than some of the other side characters. Niles is a testament to a character actor. David Hyde Pierce just crushed that. He turned it into a really fun performance, did something incredibly cool. And Martin, I love Martin as a character. You know, it's because that is how you do the conflict. I know there's like that thing in Cheers where Frasier said his father passed away, but then you get like his dad's a retired cop. He's a tough guy, and he raised these two intellectual sons who emulate their mother more than their father. It builds up for some fun dynamic there. Eddie the dog, one of the most iconic dogs on television. I love that dog. Daphne's a great character. I love Roz. Roz was probably one of my favorites. I think she was just really funny, really interesting, and Frasier just had that Cheers energy, but played up in a different way where it presented itself as like the smarter alternative, where you would tune into Frasier if you wanted like that the taste of wine as compared to a nice cold beer, but it actually wasn't the smartest show. These guys were just pompous, and it didn't come across as them being assholes. They just didn't know any better, and they just were above people in some aspects of how they presented themselves, but they're just silly guys. They're not these, you know, dicks that we see in another sitcom, which we'll get to. And Frasier, I just think he is a staple of television. You know, when we get to Seinfeld, and of course we're going to get to Seinfeld, there are staples of television who just like emulate it throughout time. Frasier was just that character who just represented every kind of person, you know, like the divorced guy, the intellectual, like the kind of like, you know, buddy up guy who does like the radio stuff. He was just the everyman, and you get why people liked him. Of course, Kelsey Grammer had like his hiccups behind the scenes here and there, but Frasier just stood true to be that great show. And I remember going off of Cheers, and like I said, Cheers hit me right there when I was in college, and I'm like, I get it. It's just like going to a place, you're hanging out with your buddies, you are having the time of your life. And then suddenly I go to Frasier, I'm out of college, and I'm just like, oh, yeah, the world sucks. You get divorced. You move in with your dad. Everything is hard. And when you do the will they, won't they, there is none better, and I will stand by this. There is none better than the Niles and Daphne one, because when you have this guy who has been pining for Daphne for 7 seasons of the show, she finally accepts him, and then she has an eating disorder because of it. And of course it's because, you know, the actress was pregnant at the time they played it up like that. But actually, in story is just that she was just put on this pedestal that Niles gave her, and it ruined her body in a sense. And I just think that's an interesting way to do it. It's not just like, oh, now we're together. Oh no, Jim and Pam, we're together now. We're not going to have any more fun things to do. Now it's giving this relationship not only a certain level of struggle where can Daphne be what Niles wants, or can Niles lower his expectations, but that's a certain layer of love where it's like they've been through so much together. Niles has been interested in this girl from the beginning, and now that they're together, there's this interesting dynamic they have to play off of in order to get things to work in the way that they both want it to. And I love that. I think it is very strong. I think it is very interesting. And it's never been done better in like the sitcom format. In other shows, yes, the romance is handled better, but in your standard 22-minute, you know, single camera comedy, or this is a multi-camera comedy, I should say, it's never been done better. It just had that perfect feel. I really like it. And speaking of things I like, I talked about it a bit there, but of course, it's Seinfeld. I know at some point, I don't know when or where in the timeline of GeekWave, I will be dedicating an entire episode to Seinfeld, because that is my top 3 shows of all time. I am a Seinfeld fanatic, and I think it would also stem from like everyone liked Friends, and I'm in this like, I want to watch Seinfeld to see these lunatics just do whatever they want. The key to liking Seinfeld, and I think this is something some people miss, you're not supposed to like the characters. You're supposed to see their actions and be like, these people are insane. Why do they find little nitpicky things? Because they hate themselves? Because they hate the world? And it's just really funny, and it's really engaging, and the humor was just so different. It had all these multiple storylines just of overreacting to the dullest things that just made its way into this beautifully connected story. It's amazing. There is no better quartet on screen than the Seinfeld characters. Jerry and Elaine and George and Kramer, they just play off each other in this beautifully poetic thing. I would call it like watching a stage play. It's just everything is so choreographed perfectly that it's almost not even in the situational comedy format. It's just like, these are fully fleshed out people. They're bad people. We're not supposed to like them. And they just come together and like make this weird tapestry of insanity going forward, whatever the case is. Somebody talks low, just like somebody is shooting a film on the street. These pretzels are making me thirsty. It's whatever the thing is. These people are insane, and they're just incredibly obnoxious and creepy because of it. I personally related to Jerry the most out of any of them, not because I'm like the germaphobe. I just think Jerry is just like, he's more subtle as compared to the rest of them. And that's what makes it great. Jerry is your lead because he's the subtle one. And Jerry's not even that subtle, but you put him next to Kramer, who is just in a league of his own for physical slapstick stuff, literally coming out of that screwball comedy era where even opening a door turns into a joke, where literally just reacting to something turns into a joke. Then you have Elaine, who is just one of the guys, which is kind of rare to see in this era, where you have like a female character as one of the guys who isn't portrayed as like a Rosie O'Donnell type. I know that sounds bad, but Rosie O'Donnell, that is like that type of female character you put in a sitcom like this that is just like, hey, I'm with the boys, what we doing here, Boston, all that. I don't know if Rosie O'Donnell's from Boston, but you get it. But she was still a female. She still acted like, I like this guy. I'm going to talk to my friends about this guy I'm interested in. We're going to have a normal conversation without these things being weird. And I think that's really cool. But of course, Costanza himself, George, is... How do you even describe this character? It is just like watching an insane person function. Every small, minute detail just affects him in this sociopathic, terrifying way where this guy at any moment could become unhinged. He could scream. He could walk out on you. Just become this weird, insane ball of energy or confusion. And for some reason, we just eat it up because it is incredibly cool to see. It is stagnantly fun. I just enjoy everything about George's performance. Now, I want to say this because this is a point of controversy I have with a lot of people. Why do people hate the Seinfeld finale? I am one of the few people you are going to meet, and I mean this completely in all sincerity. I love the Seinfeld finale. I think it is an incredibly strong finale because we spent 9 seasons watching these people be dicks, and now they are paying for it. It is like the audience finally being like, we get it. You guys are bad. We're going to arrest you for it. Having every character come back in is kind of like us, the audience, being like, we're done. We get it. And then some people are like, it turned on its audience for doing that. That was the point. The point was, we're done. We have no more story to tell, so we're going to get these characters stop being themselves because they're bad people. That's the point of the Seinfeld finale. I don't understand why people didn't really see that, because that's what it's literally saying right there in front of us. Like, that's what we're doing. But whatever. It doesn't matter. We'll talk about it again in more detail somewhere else. So, stepping aside from the world of Seinfeld, we head over to... Okay, let's get into a little behind the scenes for your host over here. Fran Drescher is probably, I would say, one of the most attractive women ever. I adore her. I love her performance. I love everything about Franny Fine. I adore The Nanny. Oh, man, The Nanny. I was like, okay, I know the ones that have to go on here, but what's like the sleeper hit I got to put on this list for me? It's The Nanny, because it's just for Fran Drescher alone. She just crushes it, and just seeing her outfits and her styling and everything she does in the scenes. I could give or take, like the Sheffields just being these basic kind of people. We're rich, we don't have a mommy, Cece wants to hook up with our daddy. And then you just got Franny here who's like, yeah, let's have fun. We're just dressing cool. We're making people popular and they're having a good time and everything is hunky-dory in this city. And I adore it. I just love this woman. She's just so energetic and bubbly and fun. And she looks great. And her outfits are astonishing. They just pop off the screen. I think The Nanny is just a really good show. And if it's something you haven't seen before, which I know there might be some people who haven't seen The Nanny, It's really funny. It is really good. It is really entertaining, and you're going to get a new appreciation for shows from the 90s just because it personifies that genre, and it's just a really fun thing to see and explore, and you just have a great time with that world. And Fran Drescher, like I said, she is just insanely cool, insanely fun, insanely popular, and you adore her to bits. Now, let's step out of the world of The Nanny for a bit, because like that show, there's another one I knew I had to put on my list when I was doing this, like the best of the 90s. Again, this is a show, I don't know, it's probably in my top 10. It's not in my top 3. It might be in my top 10 of all time. There was this little show on ABC, I do believe, and it ran for, I do believe, a few seasons, three seasons. And that little show was called Dinosaurs. Now, Dinosaurs is a big bunch of puppets. They're just walking about, people in animatronic suits. You just got Earl Sinclair, you got Fran Sinclair, you got, what's the son's name? Robbie. And then you got, I just watched the show, why can't Darlene? And the baby, you gotta love them. This show is, I think, one of the best satirical shows ever made. It's just plays on its tropes so well in the way the Flintstone does, where it's just making light of that world that it's a part of, where it's like, yeah, we get it, we're prehistoric, so when we make fun of government and the politics behind that and going to war and sexuality and, drugs and just everything, when it makes fun of everything in this beautiful way, you get an incredibly strong story that just goes to places you're not expecting. And that is one of the most impressive things to see from this show. It's also impressive that the animatronics hold up this well. They look great. They feel great. The emotions are so expressive and compelling, and the jokes land so well. When they talk about evil corporations, the We Say So Corporation, my goodness, is it just strong? Is it just funny? Is it just creative? Look, I don't know if I'd ever do this, but there are moments where I'm like, should I do a podcast just dedicated to talking about dinosaurs? Just because I think I could hold my own on it. I'd love to get into that world. Every joke works. Everything about it is just really fun. And I just love seeing what that world created. I don't even know what else to say, but like the way it plays from the 90s and still works today is one of the funniest political satires you are ever going to see. The characters just make fun of it for that. This idea of, like, one of my favorite episodes is just this idea of what it means to go to war just because somebody's different than us. And then, like, this big corporation is saying, if we go to war, then things will be better for us here. So we send our younger people to do it. It's unbelievably funny, and it's just holds up in this way that is so compelling to see. And having just, like, the dinosaur aesthetic, it just makes it so much better, so much funner. I adore everything about that. I feel like for this next one, we could make like a subcategory within the best sitcoms of the 90s, just for the best sitcoms in the 90s about growing up, because you could put Boy Meets World in there. You could put so many fantastic things. Would you put Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place? Maybe, if that's your cup of tea. But I wanted to represent that energy with one sitcom, and I was like, which one would it be? Boy Meets World is perfect, and I feel like that deserves its own talking point or its own type of style video. It's like the coming of age stories that really speak to a certain man of a certain generation. So instead of putting that on here, I decided we're going to talk about Saved by the Bell, which is arguably worse, but a staple of the 90s. It is almost so 90s it hurts. It's Saved by the Bell. It came back last year. The characters are back. But now they're kids and they're in school and they're 90s. And again, I'm born in the 90s. I'm not a kid who grew up in the 90s. I was in the 90s, wearing what, like those slap bracelets. And what else did you wear in the 90s? Afros? Was that the 90s? Were afros back in the 90s? What were kids wearing in the 90s? I wasn't skateboarding. I wasn't listening to, I don't know, who's a 90s band? O-Town? I don't know. But hey, it's like Friends, but they're young. You know, they're a bunch of kids, more diverse in their attitudes and their looks. And they're just having fun, hanging out, being 90s kids. Some of them are dickish, some of them are not dickish, but overall, they're weird kids. And I think that just speaks to a generation. Everyone had their favorite one. Everyone was like, I like them, I like them. For some reason, we all said Mario Lopez is cool. Is he? I don't know. But Saved by the Bell's the 90s, and when you put the 90s in a sitcom, you got to put that on there, man, just because that's it. There's some crazy stuff on that show, too, that's like, yeah, there's a reason that some, like, College Humor, I think it was, did, like, this guy is a loser, he's a dick. Was it Zach Morris? He's a bad guy. Yes, he is. And there's reason for that, but the show also defined a generation. You know, you can watch it anytime and be like, oh, I remember this episode. I remember that 90s thing, you know, Pogs, when Pogs were cool, you know, Furbies, the 90s, yeah, you know, stuff like that. Was Furby in the 90s? That's its own video we're not going to get into, but, you know, the 90s, Saved by the Bell's the 90s, Screech, R.I.P., bro. I mean, why'd I laugh after that? I don't know. But, you know, it's Saved by the Bell. It's cool. It's hip. It's back in 2020. They all got kids. People fell in love with these dicks for some reason. It's cool. It's just Friends, but for people who grew up. It's Friends for the 90s kids and not the 80s kids who are now in the 90s as adults. It's cool. It's fun. It's Saved by the Bell. It's awesome, I guess. Is it? Is it really? It's one of those shows that I've seen it, and I'm just like, okay, that's fun. It's no Boy Meets World, which I'm starting to regret not putting on this list, but I guess we could just say, yeah, Boy Meets World's on here too. It's good. It's fun. It characterizes the coming-of-age story perfectly. It characterizes like that girl next door love trope really interestingly. It gives us a really good relationship between a student and a teacher that's very positive and uplifting. And it doesn't have Mario Lopez. So, bonus points for that. Now, I have a couple other ones on here. We're going to run through them pretty quickly just because there's not much to say about them. First off, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Of course, it's seminal. It's important. One of the most affluent things Will Smith ever did. It put a type of storytelling front and center for an audience to see, and it made it work. It is so fun. It is so fresh, no pun intended. The series itself just struck the right chord between being campy, being political, and getting everything right. I think Alfonso Ribeiro is fantastic in that. The Uncle Phil is fantastic in that. Everything in that show, it works. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I should say, it just didn't strike me at that right time where I went back and binged it all. I've never seen all of The Fresh Prince. What I have seen from it, I think it's really good. It is very powerful. It is very funny. The jokes work. It's one of those ones I go back to. I'm like, I should really watch this because it's a powerful story. It's a fun characterization of this world. And having Will Smith, I think in the prime of Will Smithing, you know, he's the funny rap guy. Here he is acting, and it's actually not bad acting. He's actually not bad at this stuff. So he's doing it, and it's cool. And that's fun to see because it actually works for him and it makes us all smile a little bit for seeing what that guy can do. So I like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I applaud it for being something special. Congratulations. Home Improvement. Do you like building stuff? Yes, you do. Do you like Tim Allen? Yes, you do. There you go. And fun story about this, it's where my name comes from. That's all I got on Home Improvement. I think it's the youngest son, is named Taryn. That's where my name's from. Home Improvement. Build a better house. Didn't Home Improvement Tim Allen end up on Last Man Standing Tim Allen? And it was like dueling Tim Allens. Right? That's what happened? I don't care. Home Improvement is just like funny, cool, creative. We're building shit. We got a friend that's funny. We got a son who's different, a son who's not different, and a son who's kind of fun. That's it. Got a wife I like, but do I love her? Yes. Home Improvement. Same with Married with Children. it's like, is it making fun of like, like the domestic bliss thing where it's like, look how quirky and different we are? Maybe? I don't actually know. But Married with Children, there you go. Ed O'Neill just continuing to be silly. He's good at it. He's made a career out of being the curmudgeonly old guy, and I think that's impressive to see because that's like my dream job, is just to be the curmudgeonly old guy at 23 years old. That's all I want to do. So that's great. Katie Seagal's gotten a lot of work out of it. It's good. It's fun. It's Married with Children. Again, there's so many of those like, oh, look at me. I hate my wife, but I still love her and I want to be with her. And it's like, oh, my husband, he's cranky and he's a man, but I gotta love him. Our son is different because he's looking at society from a young person's view. And our daughter is kind of quirky because she wants to hang out with boys. There's about 1,000 of those. And this one just works because of the leads. That's it. That's the only reason this one stands out. No other reason. No other reason. Now, you can get mad at me or not for this next one because it's either something that is a sitcom or it's not classified as a sitcom, but I put it as a sitcom because it is in prime time and it's funny and it's a comedy. That, of course, is the show from Fox that is currently still ongoing, is on its 33rd season this year, and I am doing weekly reviews of those episodes if you want to check that out on the channel. The Simpsons. Now, I'm not going to get too far into The Simpsons. I wanted to bring up The Simpsons just because I sit at the top of the show. I have like a top 3 series of all time. I put Seinfeld in there. I put The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel in there. And right up there at number 3, I put The Simpsons. And when you talk peak Simpsons, you cannot help but talk the 90s, because the 90s era of The Simpsons is some of the funniest written episodes of television ever devised in any format, whether it's animated or live action. Those episodes are so funny and poignant and just cool and creative, and you love the atmosphere of that show. It is the best era of The Simpsons. It is the best era of storytelling. And it is like, I think, the staple when it comes to why the 90s can be funny and relevant today. Shows like, Dinosaurs and The Simpsons and all that, they just make you see the 90s in this beautiful bow and do something cool with it. And I will commend a show that does that in spades and makes it work in a cool way. So those are my top sitcoms of the 90s. In a few months or even a year, we will come back to talk about the 80s. But what's the point? They're all pretty much the same thing with different strokes. That was funny for one person because it doesn't even make sense because different strokes. Yeah, you get it. It's cool. Now, before we leave, I always like to end things with talking about my recommendations for you guys. And of course, since we were talking about sitcoms, I'm going to give you my recommendations off that. First off, The Nanny, because Fran Drescher is a goddess. We cherish her with all of our might. Dinosaurs, because it's perfect and it's funny and captivating. Home Improvement, because that's where my name comes from. Check it out for that reason alone. Maybe you'll learn something about building. I don't actually know. Tim Allen's in it. Watch the Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory because it is fantastic and it's a great film. It does a lot of cool stuff. And if you're interested, read the books based on Isaac Asimov's Foundation. I wouldn't watch the show. Just read the books. I'm sure it's either better or worse, but it exists and we will cherish it for that reason and that reason alone. Now, I'm going to wrap things up here by saying if you have any topics for me that you'd like to see me discuss, please email them to me or leave them in the comment section below. If you are listening to this on the podcast feed, please give us a rating over there. It definitely helps out. And thank you guys so much for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck.